Hey, you are listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast dedicated to educating and engaging individuals on mental health awareness and suicide prevention. And we're celebrating once again another Friday the 13th as we are taking a step into 1987's The New Blood, Friday the 13th, Part 7. Hope you guys enjoy this one. Well, I am flying solo for this one, or we're breaking tradition, I guess is a better way to say it. I am your host, Captain Nostalgia, and we're talking about Jason Voorhees. We're just keeping this marathon going as we've been working our way through the Friday the 13th franchise every Friday the 13th. And unfortunately, my partner in crime for this one had to step back, had to sit this one out just for personal reasons. But I am joined by the TikToker known as Dusty the 13th.
Hey man, thanks for having me on. I know I have big shoes to fill, and hopefully I don't let you down.
No, man, I think you're going to do great. And so when we started this, and you've listened to the episodes, I was new to this franchise. I'd never seen a Friday the 13th film, and you create a lot of TikTok content that is almost exclusively about Jason. And I'm curious, kind of like talk about your like connection and kind of like your introduction and why you love this franchise so much.
I've always been a huge fan of horror ever since I was a little kid. It was always, Tales from the Crypt Keeper, Tales from the Crypt, anything horror related, monster related. I was just always drawn to that for whatever reason. When other kids were playing Batman and Superman, I was playing, Jason, and I had a Freddy glove I would run around with. So there's definitely something there that I don't know why it's there, but it's there. So Friday the 13th has always had a special place in my heart. I just love everything about it. I'm one of those people that love the first one, even though there's no Jason. I've probably seen that one more than any other, if you can believe it or not. As far as into TikTok, basically I'm kind of new to TikTok, but I kept seeing people send me stuff like, look at this Michael Myers, look at this Jason guy, like, you should do this, you should do this. I'm like, I'm not going to do this. Like, I'm 35 years old. They don't need me on TikTok. They don't want me on TikTok. And then one day I said, I could do this. So I kind of I just kind of like did a TikTok video, and people started to notice it. And I'm like, wow, people are noticing this? Like, I can't even believe it. I'm so humbled by it that, that people are noticing my stuff. And I think my video right now is, one of them is like at 340,000 views. And that's just unbelievable to me.
Yeah, TikTok's a weird platform where you can just basically like put your thoughts out there, be completely like weird and just yourself, and people just completely run with it. Like it really surprises me. Like I had one too that like I was like I don't want to do this, and then like I started creating like horror content on here as well, and like I'm very sporadic with my videos, but like again, like it is surprisingly like the people that like are actually like watching it and like getting notifications about it. I'm like, was not expecting any of this. For those of you guys that have never checked out Dusty's TikTok before, one of the things that you do is kind of like dress up front to head to toe in Jason gear and just kind of go chill out in the woods. And I'm curious, what's the experience been like without?
Kind of started dabbling with cosplay. That's another thing that I've always wanted to do, but just never really had the chance. And now that I am a grown man and I have that adult money that I can just blow, I got into it. And it took me a long time to decide which Jason I wanted to cosplay because I have such an affinity for all of them. But the Womp Stomp Films version of, Never Hike Alone, Never Hike in the Snow, the Ghost Jason, that one is my like just favorite aesthetically pleasing Jason. So I chose him, and the actual community that's involved with have sort of embraced me for that and given me like their nod and their blessing. So that's the one that I've been cosplaying right now, and I hope to do more in the future. Definitely would like to do like a part 4.
It's crazy too, like when you like actually sit down and like go through all of the Friday installments, how similar but like slightly different each version of the character looks. Like it's kind of almost like another like big portion of our content is superhero stuff. And so like it's like you look at something like Batman, like how similar all of the Joel Schumacher removed, how similar all of those suits look, and then you're like, but they're slightly different at the same time.
Sure, I'm one of those people that nitpicks every little new minutia and nuance of Jason, everything, mask, the footwear, every little thing. I'm one of those types of people that I can, category, which one I like the most and which one, I like the least. I actually did a TikTok video that someone had asked me a Q&A to rank my aesthetically pleasing Jasons.
Well, that's awesome. And so you guys can find Dusty on TikTok. It's at Dusty the 13th. We will provide a link in the description wherever you're currently listening or streaming this right now. But we are talking about the 7th installment, which arguably is one of the strangest entries into this franchise, because it's like, I mean, we're gonna obviously get to Jason Goes to Hell eventually, and that's another weird aesthetic, but I digress. This one is this one has really interesting ideas, and you had talked about when we were messaging back and forth about you coming on doing this episode about that you have a love for this film, and this film's also, it should be worth mentioning that it's like, I don't want to say like it's a turning point, but it's definitely a important film in the legacy of the franchise, because this is the first film from Kane-hodder as well.
That's a very good point, and I definitely wanted to bring that up as well, that, this would be Kane-Hodder's premiere as Jason, and he would continue to play Jason the most out of any other actor, and I think he feels like he sort of owns the character now. Rightfully so. He did an incredible job in Part 7 and the rest.
Oh, I 100% agree, and I feel like Hodder is one of those, just his stature is, he just has like such an iconic status and transformative performance that he brings to Jason. And I didn't realize that this was his first performance until this most recent rewatch, and obviously like I knew that he was Jason X and Jason Goes to Hell, and but I didn't realize that it started here with New Blood. And it's really interesting to look at this, and also to because I watched this twice for this podcast, so I also listened to the Shout Factory, Scream Factory commentary that they did with him and the director, and kind of talked about like why they wanted to bring Hodder into this role. But I feel like Hodder and Voorhees are kind of almost as competitive as Robert Englund and Freddy Krueger, Nick Castle, and Michael Myers.
That's a super fair synopsis. I think that I'm a CJ Graham guy also, because Part 6 is my favorite of the franchise. But you're right, Kane-Hodder it's almost like they go hand in hand. I think you nailed that. I think a lot of other people would think that's fair as well. To me, the most amazing thing about Kane-Hodder is just the beating that he puts himself through to make that movie. I mean, he has a stunt background, of course. He had an accident on a previous movie, and I don't know which one it was. I should know this, but I don't, where he was burned very badly. And if you remember in Part 7, I mean, he gets set on fire again. So imagine being an actor who has that traumatic thing happen to you, and they're like, okay, guess what, we're going to do this again, except this time, it's going to be, you're going to be completely engulfed, we're going to throw a building on you. Like, the guy just got put through the ringer.
Also, that particular scene that you talked about, I guess we're gonna throw a spoiler warning here, but the particular scene that you're talking about is the scene where like the awning and like the roof falls on him. Like, when you look at him react in that moment, like that's his genuine reaction, because that nobody told him they were gonna drop a building on him. And no. I watched that, and like knowing that in hindsight now with the commentary was just like gave me such a deeper appreciation for his performance in this one. I
agree with you. Just and sorry, I didn't know about the spoiler.
No, you're good, dude.
Okay. So basically, yes, the reaction that you get from Kane-Hodder, like you said, that is they didn't tell him, and that's a bunch of building coming down on him, and it's a dangerous job. And like I said, I think all considering, with all that gear on and all that latex, and to still give that performance and just keep coming, my hat's off to him. He earned it as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, I had so much more just respect for him coming out of this, because I feel like as a viewer, and like I don't know if you get this from like people that aren't like horror people or like horror files, where you just like, oh, like anybody can put themselves into a jumpsuit and a mask or a costume and just walk. Like, it doesn't take talent like to do something like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees. And the answer is it does. And I'm so glad that they talked about this, that I was able to like go through and listen to the commentary, because a lot of like they talked about the particular there's two particular shots where Jason is underwater. They talked about like the challenges in the beginning of having him actually like underneath there, and like how it was, like how hard it was for him to really be under there and like actually like still stay in character. And then there's a scene at the end where Tina actually brings him down into like a puddle. He said that the puddle was just like freezing cold water, because they shot this in like January, and like the depth of winter. So a lot of what you're seeing here is like him just really just embracing that stuntman mentality, and I feel like that's what gives his Jason such a more authentic edge over all of the other performers that we've seen.
I would say also when Tina does to me the most epic face reveal of the entire franchise, when the mask just explodes off of Jason's face, it takes probably more talent for someone who's not allowed to talk to basically express how they're feeling in that moment. Getting shot with the nails and engulfed and still to be able to make your face move in such a way where we know what Jason's feeling right now. He is not happy. He's going after her. So that takes, I think, more talent than to be able to express how you feel with words. So I think that a lot of those guys, like the stunt guys, they get, oh, you're just a stunt guy, stand here, we'll throw this on you, whatever. But he is a legitimate actor, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and we talked about this in our Willy's Wonderland episode, where here you have an actor like Nicolas Cage, and in this case it's Kane-Hodder, that have to express themselves without even uttering a word. And
correct.
You can have an actor that can be world renowned and just respect it, like your Marlon Brando's, Robert De Niro's, your Joe Pesci's, that could really just sink their teeth and just be transformative in any role. But what is really going to convey and be memorable as a performance are going to be the expressions of how they accentuate words and monologues. Whereas you look to performances like Hodder here and Cage and Willy's, and neither actor ever says anything, and they're having to convey stuff via their body language and their facial expressions. And this is the only time in the franchise, at least up to this point so far, that you actually get to see that type of like deranged emotion from Jason. You can argue about it like in part 4 in the finale, where it's Jason versus Tommy and his sister, but you never really kind of get to convey that deep level of emotional output that we get to see here from Tina.
I agree 100% with everything you just said, especially about the part 4.
And Tina's a really interesting character, because this is why I think that this film's so interesting, because I feel like when you look at this film, you can't just look at New Blood for being a slasher. You really have to look at the landscape of the times of when this was released, because not only are you breaking the quote-unquote slasher formula in here, like, yes, it's still here, but this is the first film that we've seen in the franchise so far that has a subplot, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But this is also the first time that we've actually seen them fully embrace the supernatural elements and also give him a formidable foe years before he would find in Freddy Krueger.
That's absolutely very well said. I think that Tina is sort of, it's almost like instead of Freddy versus Jason, this is Carrie versus Jason. It's so interesting to me. She's like very Carrie-esque, and you're right, a very formidable foe. I mean, she to me is probably the toughest final girl out of all of them.
Yeah, and how do you feel about the idea of Carrie versus Jason? Like, I feel like it presents a lot of like interesting perspectives that you could really do with this. But you are probably a bigger fan of this film than I am, and you have a lot more of a love relationship. Like, how do you feel about kind of how they executed this?
It's funny because it's complicated as far as the way I feel about this film. It's almost like part 5 for me. Like if I was making the film, I would just change a couple of things and it would be a masterpiece, but that's my opinion. So I think it's definitely interesting. I think that for what they were going for and what they originally shot and what got cut out by the ratings board and the assistant producer, I think it was an epic film. I think that it all of the effects, the kills. I mean, this is the one with everyone's favorite, the sleeping bag scene. I mean, the amount of effort that they put into that, and then what got cut out of it is crazy. It's almost like we're seeing the film that could have been when you look at some of the forgotten footage or the original shooting footage. I think, it could have even been even better.
Yeah, the MPAA is really weird in this time, especially when it comes to horror films. Like, I was listening to a podcast today specifically talking about one of the deaths from Nightmare 5, the Dream Master that got cut, and like it just blows my mind because it's like, even by that standard in like the late 80s, like I still don't understand why you're so hostile towards that. And they talked about the sleeping bag gag on the commentary, and originally Jason was like did it 5 times, but they said that like it hit such a deep impact just to do it once. And it was like I feel like that is definitely what they were able to convey. Like, and you get to see that come back later in the was it Jason X, right?
Yes. Yep. They revisit that, and it's funny because Kane-Hodder even said that he was satisfied with the final take of the sleeping bag. He said he almost thought it was better than the original. However, when they first shot it with the 5 times, it was a heavy dummy and 20 gallons of fake blood. I mean, imagine how epic that would have been if we would have gotten that. I really wish that they would just, reproduce kind of like a director's cut of that film. But from what I understand, it's been destroyed or lost. So we'll never see the 5 times 20 gallons of blood.
That saddens me, not only as a fan of Friday the 13th, but as a cinephile, because I always want to see like the director's like original vision that they had when they came in to actually do a film. And specifically the way that he talked about some of the gags and like how over the top they were, and when they were mapping out like how they wanted to do the gags with the blood and gore, they were like, we wanted to go as like just over the top extensive as possible. Like we wanted to kind of like almost be like a satire of what like horror is in this time, but we also kind of wanted to like, it's weird also hearing them talk about like how they wanted to like be the Mighty Python of horror films.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. However, I would argue that this is, to me, the most serious of the franchise. Part 6 and Part 5, I mean, they're sometimes downright comical. They're comedies, I mean, essentially. And before that, the franchise was serious, but it had, the cop from Part 1, and, there's little scenes where you can make it a little bit lighthearted to kind of loosen you up, and then they scare you or scare the audience for that time. But this one, it really doesn't mess around. From the beginning to the end, it's all business. Tina is not messing around from the minute that the movie starts to the very end. So I think that it, for whatever reason, I noticed that when I went back to rewatch the film as well, that there's not a lot of like one-liners in there. There's no gags that you really remember. There's no Court from like Part 6.
Yeah, and I talked about this when we did Part 6 back in April, that like parts 1 through 5, like I was watching them in preparation for the episodes, and finally this past year for Christmas, like I ended up like just breaking down and getting the Shout Factory box set that they did with the stellar art. I mean, I feel like I bought it just for the art alone.
It is beautiful. It's beautiful. The artwork on that box, it is beautiful in itself as a collector.
Yeah, I own quite a lot of like horror sets, and as far as like art goes, I feel like that and my Hellraiser Arrow are like just the best art wise. But I digress. And so like I was just like powering through the entire series as soon as I got it, and I was like texting Anthony as I was like going through and doing it, like sharing my thoughts. And I was not the hugest fan of this film the first time I saw it, and then the last time that I watched it in preparation for this episode, as you were to your point, like I really felt like there is a weight to this film, and I feel like a large portion of that weight is because this is the first time that we actually have a final girl that feels fleshed out. And like I feel like you can make the argument for, was it Chris in part 3 that like experienced like Jason and was like all messed up in the head from it? If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Right.
Okay. I was just making sure I was getting my characters and my movies right. But like you can make the argument for her, but Chris, because you have the doctor character here as well, like their dynamic makes this film just embrace that serious tone so much more.
One thing that I noticed watching this film is I believe it's the first time in the franchise that we have any sort of domestic violence type situation. And it hits you right as soon as, I mean, you're into the movie 1-2 minutes and it's already a heavy situation with the father being, drunk and beating the mother. And right there, that's an emotional thing for people as well. So they're already kind of like taking all the holds out and going right for a very touchy subject that sets the mood for the rest of the film.
One of the things too that after you come into modern day, because like you said, like the film opens up on a flashback, and then we get to really see what the source of that did. And I think that so many times we see in these horror films where you see a character that has trauma and we just try and kind of like write that trauma off, but this film really invests the viewer into this character of Tina. And I think that really helps this film a lot, because here you have a character that not only thinks that she murdered her father, but she has the trauma of also not only witnessing the domestic disturbance right in front of her, but also witnessing the death of a parent right in front of her as well.
Correct. And one thing that I noticed about the character as well, you can tell she's a torn person, because she goes from "I hate you, Daddy," murdering her father essentially, to "Daddy, no," kind of like very remorseful. And you can just tell that she's complicated, that life at home is complicated. And they did it in such a short amount of time that we didn't have time to go back and visit her entire life story. We have to know instantly, wow, she's got some baggage going on here,
Yeah, and I don't know if if I can speak to like everyone's home life growing up, but I know that for me that like there were very few times that like I told a parent that like I hated them and immediately like had that like sense of like regret that Tina goes through, because like there's something that like switches in your brain, like, and I didn't grow up in like a like verbally abusive or like physically abusive or anything like that. Like I had a great home life growing up, but there were those times where like not just being a kid that like I'm thinking selfishly, like, and I'm pursuing that, and immediately it's like as soon as those words leave my mouth, like bam, like I just regret, remorse, and like it just sets in. And that's kind of what I feel like we see here with Tina in the opening credits.
Agreed. Yeah, you can tell that it's a flip of a switch, and you can tell she has a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, and it's interesting to like note that like at such a young age, because she's like what, like 7 or 8 here.
Yeah, I think the way the timeline works in the movies, we're looking when she's older. It's about 10 years have passed. So maybe she's 7, 8 years old.
That would make sense. Yeah. Okay. So like this camp is kind of like the source of like pain and the center of her trauma. And one of the things that I think this film does really well is it's really honest, and specifically about like the practices that we can sometimes see, especially with Dr. Cruz. Is here you have a guy that understands the quote unquote gift of Tina and really wanting to kind of exploit that. And so you have these like really shady counseling and or like mental health practices that are going down. And I would kind of like to put those in perspective, like I would kind of equate this to like therapists or those of us that have been in. Let me back up. For those that are in the mental health field that are quick to really write prescriptions rather than actually get down into the trenches with their clients and want to see progress.
I agree. The Dr. Cruz character, probably to me, one of the most unlikable characters in the entire franchise. Basically, it's almost like there's two villains in this movie. You have, of course, Jason Voorhees, and then you have this Dr. Cruz character. And it's like, which one's worse throughout the entire version of the movie? Which one do you hate, more? Even though we all love Jason, but he is, the antagonist. So I think this is the first time you have another character in the movie that we kind of have to look out for and worry about.
I will 100% agree, and I feel like what this film does really well is it's probably in the second act, the tail end of the second act, where you start to kind of see that he's only after himself and his ambitions. Because seeing it from his perspective, here I have a telekinetic girl that if I can train her just right to get out of trauma, I'm looking at a big book deal. We see this similarly in Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, where Dr. Loomis has gone through this traumatic event with Michael Myers and is going to cash in on that. And that is kind of what, and I don't want to like step on anyone's toes, but it is like, in my full opinion, like it is kind of I would argue not the greatest practice of mental health professionalism when you are quick to kind of say, what can I get out of this versus how can I help my client heal? Because I would even dare ask, like, why are you in the position of your line of work in the first place? And I feel like Dr. Cruz embodies that so well here.
Pretty much, Dr. Cruz is a horrible human being, and we established that well early on in the movie. Just the way that he treats Tina, he's very abusive to her. It's almost like every male figure in her life has always sort of treated her this way, and she's just sort of used to it and has some sort of like Stockholm syndrome. But I mean, at the very end, using the mother as a human shield. I mean, this guy is a horrible person. He's probably, like I said, he's almost as bad as a villain as Jason. The guy is horrible. And yes, he's exploiting her. It's all for his own personal gain, and yeah, he's just so unlikable. And it's crazy to think that the guy from Weekend at Bernie's, who doesn't say who has probably less speaking lines than Jason Voorhees, turns into this horrible monster by the time we get to part 7.
I mean that's just a testament to his performance as an actor. But yeah, you're right. Like there is so much here that he just I don't know. Like he is the secondary villain, and in this I love the way that you put that. Like obviously we're coming here for Jason, but I think equally sometimes you do have those horror films that do come in, and it's like, all right, we're gonna also give you the secondary villain. It's kind of like when you see the end of Scream and it's revealed to be Billy Loomis, and then right behind him you also have Stu. You always have that secondary villain. Not always, but you do have those cases where the secondary villain. And I feel like that makes the story compelling if it's pulled off right.
I think your example of Dr. Loomis in the second Rob Zombie Halloween is a perfect example of this Dr. Cruz character.
Yeah, because I mean, even it's not until, for sticking on Loomis, like it's not until he gets to the hotel room where he's watching the interview back that he has with the dude from The Talking Dead. I digress. But him and Weird Al, there's that scene, and he's just kind of like looking at like how much of a mockery that he's been made out of, but he's also become this kind of like shell of where he used to be, where he's like, I actually used to care about this patient. I used to care about people, and Zombie does really well at pulling off like the satire and the embodiment almost of those people that have those high profiled clients, and ultimately end up kind of being like, all right, well, now that my name's associated with this, I might as well see what I can get out of this. And Dr. Cruz, I think, isn't quite to that Loomis example yet, but he's definitely gearing up, and he's definitely pushing towards that.
You go from, I know we're supposed to be talking about Friday the 13th, but being too horror nuts, this is what always happens, right? Anytime you're discussing these types of things, it's like a rabbit hole. In the first one, you love Loomis. We always love Loomis in all the Halloween franchises. He's a lovable character. But you go in Rob Zombie's part 2 there, and you're just like, yeah, I'm all done with Dr. Loomis.
Yeah, I controversial decision. I love Halloween 2. It's one of my favorite in the franchise, and it pains me every time Loomis is on the screen, just because of how unlikable his character is. And also doing a podcast like this, and kind of seeing the dirtier side of mental health professionalism, it really aches me. And so it breaks my heart watching a movie like The New Blood where that's also the case as well.
I think that's why we digress so much, is because I really did enjoy that you're saying Dr. Loomis and Dr. Cruz are basically almost kind of the same character. I thought that was beautifully illustrated.
Well, thank you. So, let's move from Dr. Cruz. Let's move to our final girl in Tina, and Tina versus Jason, the ultimate showdown until 2003's Freddy versus Jason. Because this is the first time that we've actually seen Jason have a villain, have a protagonist to stand toe to toe with him.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this isn't, a pitchfork and trying to pretend to be his mom. She really she throws him through the ringer for sure. I mean, that toe to toe, she's holding her own throughout the entire movie. And, she doesn't even need to back down. She's just as powerful, if not more.
Well, I think what's also too what's really interesting about her journey is she's learning to heal from this trauma. And that's kind of so compelling. And there are some times, and I probably would argue it's probably not the healthiest thing for your mental health to just kind of be picked up and just throw a kid into the swimming pool to teach them how to swim. But that's kind of what happens here with Tina, where she's kind of thrusted into this world where it's like, okay, now I have to learn how to unleash this gift or this curse, however I'm looking at it, to stop this guy from killing me. And he's supernatural, and so I'm going to combat it with supernatural. I also liked how this is the first film that we've seen in the franchise that has just kind of gone full-blown bananas. Jason is like supernatural. He's undead. Even his character design reflects that. This is probably my favorite character design we've seen so far from him up to this point in the franchise.
I love the Part 7 Jason in an aesthetically a way. The way they've portrayed that he is decayed under Crystal Lake, all these years later, and I believe it was Kane-Hodder said that he somehow had to make him a zombie, but also strong and athletic and agile, and it's a very hard line to play. When in Part 6 he's literally made of like spider webs and maggots and stuff. But no, Part 7, that is that's an iconic Jason. I think a lot of people would agree.
Some of my favorite shots of Jason in this are just him like walking through stuff, and you just kind of get to see that like just that gaping hole in the back of his jacket, and you just see bones in his spine. Like, it's so gorgeous.
You can just tell the sheer power that Kane-Hodder was bringing to the screen. Not to get back on Kane-Hodder again, even though I'm sure if he heard this, he would love it. Just the power that he brought behind that. I mean, you just see it in the brute strength that he has. And you're right. All the shots they do of Jason, it's just so pleasing. He just looks so cool.
Yeah, and we were starting to get to this epic battle between the supernatural forces, but I have a couple more things to say about Kane-Hodder, so we can just hang out here for a few minutes. I found it interesting too that Paramount did not want Hodder in this film originally, which I don't know how this film would have been differently. I don't think that this film would have been so iconic and would have been so in like enjoyable or like revisitable had it not been for Hodder being here. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Sometimes I think you don't really know what you have until you have it, and when you have the CJ Graham Jason in Part 6, like I said, it's my favorite, so it has a special place. You're like, wow, it can't get any better than this. It can't get any better. Every single time we get a Jason, it can't get any better than this. And then, they bring Kane-Hodder in, and you're like, wow, like, this is Jason. This is what it is supposed to be. And I think that's why he is so kind of, you can't think of one without thinking about the other, essentially, now, forever until the end of time.
Hodder feels like coming into the Jason role, like you said, like it's wow, this one can't get any better, and then you get to the next one, and you're like, this guy can't get any better, and it's kind of almost like the equivalent of like take like a band that is like starting to like try to like find their sound, and they have to go like 2 or 3 albums in, and then by the time that they get the 4th album, they're just like this is the sound we have spent the last 10 years searching for, and this is what we're going to have moving forward. And that's what Hodder feels like to the Friday the 13th franchise.
I think that's perfect. I think I agree very much. He loves that character. You know, he loves that character. He's very emotionally attached to the character as well. And he says that all the time in all kinds of interviews.
And as he should be. I mean, and, you know, I think now that if it wasn't for this character, I would even kind of go off on a limb and say we wouldn't have Hatchet, or his Victor Crowley wouldn't be the same, because, like, in a way, like, Victor Crowley almost kind of embodies a lot of, like, the Jason mannerisms, the way that he moves and the way that he kills. And even that franchise as a whole really kind of embodies a lot of those. It feels like a love letter to Friday the 13th, especially now that we're kind of in this world where it's tied up in legal battles all the way, though. You know, if you want to believe Corey Feldman, that's cool too. I'm still waiting on legit things to come out, you know.
I mean, have we ever had any reason not to believe Corey Feldman? I'm only kidding. So you're right about the Hatchet franchise. Kane-Hodder invented the Jason sort of head movement that just like your head moves, then your body follows with it, that we hadn't had before. I think is a lot of to do with the prosthetics and the latex that the actors just weren't really able. It was almost like you spoke about Batman earlier, but how Batman, he really has to move his entire body to really see what's going on. And it's not until Christian Bale's character says, I want to be able to move my head. Kane-Hodder fought through that, and he invented that sort of like that we now think of when we think of Jason. And I mean, I believe they've done it in all the movies since then. And I believe, I've never played it, but I've been told that the video game, they have a lot of those elements in there as well.
I think I own it, but I've never actually played it, so there's that. But I think a large portion of that is actually because, like, he was the CGI like mocap suit for Jason, so it would make sense that you would have Jason move in that way.
That's incredible. I had no idea. I'm not a video game guy, but if there was one video game I would ever play, it would definitely be that one.
Dead by Daylight is a close second. It's another good one that's kind of on that Friday the 13th level. But also, too, you know, we would also be reminiscent not to talk about the way that they made Jason larger than life. One of the camera tricks that they did, because so many of Jason's kills kind of happen in the forest behind, you know, Camp Crystal Lake, and one of the things that I love the way that they did this is they talked about, like, anytime that they would shoot from a Jason angle, the camera was always lower, so it made him feel taller. And anytime you would have the camera on the victim that he was chasing, it would always be higher, so that it could feel like it could really give you that, like, towering inferno feel for Jason.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's almost a meme now about how humongous Jason is. They just keep getting perpetually larger as we go. But that's sort of my version of Jason. That's the Jason that I've, you know, come to love, is this just humongous monster, you know, almost like a Frankenstein kind of character.
I think it makes him, like, honestly, like it just... I know it's been kind of like a controversial thing, is, like, you know, should these, like, characters be larger than life? Like, if they're not, like, tall, like, you know, brooding gentlemen, are they truly scary? And, you know, we see that with Tyler Mane to bring back, you know, Rob Zombie. And then you have someone like Nick Castle that is just kind of very slender and kind of, you know, medium build, but he still is able to really embody that character. And then, of course, you have Robert Englund's Freddy Krueger, who is very, very slender and kind of like a medium build, and yet he is able to really pack a punch and really be terrifying.
You absolutely nailed it. I mean, Robert Englund was exactly what I was going to say about him being so slender yet so powerful.
But yeah, and then when you get the two together, which I know you'll discuss later on, just the difference in the two characters, and how much one has to overcompensate for the others, size and strength.
And it's, then you can also kind of like get into like, some of like whoever's like worn the ghost face has always kind of been that way as well. But then to jump back over to Tina, you have this character that is telekinetic, like we have established. It was basically a pseudo carry, and this is kind of the first time that we're seeing this in this era of just copycat slashers, directed videos, and this is really the first time that we are having kind of almost a battle royale type of slasher film. And I think that's what really made me get a new appreciation for this film, is that it's not just trying to copy, they are genuinely trying to do something new that you're not seeing and that you're not expecting. And by the 7th film in your franchise, I feel like you have to do that. You have to find some new way to reinvent them and to really bring Jason back. And I think that you have Tina being a compelling enough character that she can actually hold the film from a more natural standpoint, but then also at the same time you have this fan favorite in Jason Voorhees, and the two just have such an excellent rivalry that I feel like it's probably some of the best that we've seen actually in the franchise.
I agree 100%. Tina is a character that never gets a moment to just chill. I mean, every other movie in the franchise, there's at least some break where the character gets to go do something that isn't just under distress. I mean, from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie, she has no chance to just relax and have a good time. Even when she's getting invited to a party, she's being antagonized, by her peers. So I think she's just had it by the time this guy in a hockey mask comes up. If it wasn't him, it'd be someone else. She is all done. And she definitely gives it everything she has to Jason, and he just keeps coming back for more. And she keeps putting him right back in his place. It's very interesting.
So before we kind of dig into Tina's character and kind of like why she doesn't get that break like you're talking about, I want to ask, because as a fan of this movie, I have my issues with the way this film ends, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on kind of how this movie ends.
Do you mean how it ends abruptly?
Oh, yes.
In the back of the
yes.
ambulance, and it's like they basically look at each other and go, well, that sucked. And then it's like cutscene credits, and you're just like, that's it? What do we got? That's it? So
I guess I'm going to back up and kind of like when I clarify and say that it basically a soccer dad is what kills Jason in the end. I don't.
Oh God, yes. Okay, I thought you meant literally the end because that is terrible too. I wish they would have just like at least faded to black or something. Yes, the father, the abusive alcoholic water zombie.
But yes. it's like for me again, like looking at this film like through a cinephile, it's like originally she was trying to resurrect her father and ends up actually resurrecting Jason. So it's like you could make the argument, it's like, well, if you can resurrect your father now at willpower, like what makes your energy, telekinetic energy, different now versus the beginning of the film when you're trying to resurrect him in the first place?
I think I know exactly what you mean. I mean, I guess if you were going to look at this analytically, you would say, well, she didn't really know what her powers were until the end of the movie. Then she sort of harnesses them and knows how to control them a lot better. Interestingly enough, I don't know if you know this, but I'm sure you've felt this way, and everyone who's ever watched Part 7 has felt like when the dad does appear out of the water, everyone's like, that's it? Like, he's been under the water 10 years. He should be a lot worse looking than that. And I did not know this. But the original filming of the movie, apparently they had prosthetics, they had, makeup. He was in the makeup chair for hours. They shot all of this footage, and the executive assistant producer, Barbara Sachs, cut it. She was not a fan of the zombie dad at the end. Apparently she's not a big horror fan to begin with, but she was a part of this project. So she, along with the ratings board, just destroyed this movie for what it could have really been. I would love, like I said, to see a director's cut. So at the end, you end up with this father coming out with mud on his face, essentially, and we're supposed to suspend our belief to just be like, oh, well, okay, maybe the water's cold down there. I don't know.
See, like even by that standpoint, like I'm like, okay, like I can get behind, like, at least, like, Makeup Dad, like, really embracing the zombie angle, but, like, it still seems so weird to me that, like, that's the catalyst of what brings Jason back under. Like, that is so anticlimactic, especially after you've gone through so much of this climactic force where Jason has been set on fire, has had a building dropped on him, has been hung. Like, he goes through, he's fallen through stairs. Like, just Tina is just giving him just like heaven and earth, just bringing it down upon him, and he's still rising. And it's like this like 15 minutes like sequence that just like keeps on coming and keeps on coming, and I'm all about it. And then it ends by a dad rising from the ground.
I definitely agree with you. Other thing that's complicated for me with that is it definitely speaks to the time, I think, 1988. But I feel like we're not supposed to like the dad. Domestic violence is one of those things that it's a big no-no, and everybody knows that, and it gives everybody that kind of feeling. And it's almost like the person that's like the drunken father figure, we would put him as like a complicated character, but for him to be the hero at the end of the movie, I think it speaks to the time frame that we're in. So it's like, now we like the dad. I don't know. It's a very confusing emotional roller coaster there in that movie.
I'm kind of glad that you bring up the time, because you really have to look at the time in which this is released and kind of like how media is. And you talk about how the film opens up on a domestic violence situation, and that's ultimately how he ends up losing his life, and kind of how Tina invokes all of this trauma. And this is a year before, and this is a weird example, but The Simpsons. And you look at kind of how Homer, treats Bart in some sequences where he's quite literally choking him. And he has, that domestic, that's literally the same thing. Like, it's domestic violence. It's going from, wife to kid. That's the only difference. And yet that show, that's been a cornerstone of that show for many years. And, even as a fan of that show now, like, they have kind of gotten away from doing that, because we're in an era now where it's not socially acceptable. And you're completely right. Like, this is a era where you have people like, Al Bundy and also Homer Simpson that are just lighting up primetime on our televisions and being embraced for being emotionally abusive and or even physically abusive parents and or spouses, and yet they're still made out to be the heroes. It's a strange thing to really consider.
It really is. And that's one of the things I think is we forget about film, that they really are time capsules. It really is a snapshot to see what was trending back then, not just like what people were wearing or the language, but really what was socially acceptable at a time. And how far we've come, that we're sort of like sensitive about those types of things, where, when I was growing up, that was just, grumpy dad. It was like, it was comical. It was just the norm. And I kind of like that we have these little timestamps, because then I can show my kid, like, you see how good you have it?
Yeah, and I think to your point too about, like, it being in this time capsule, it is weird because now we are in an era where Me Too is a thing. And that's why I think that 2018's Halloween really speaks to this time period so incredibly well, is because you have Laurie Strode going through this trauma that now she's fighting back, and now that fear has been loosened, and she just has just reckless regret regard. Like, she's just going in and she's just ready to stand toe to toe with the Shape. And I think that a large portion of what you have here with Tina is also the same exact way, where you have a character that is just riddled in trauma because of what she's had to endure from the first moment of the frame, even to kind of having this trauma also make her socially awkward, where we're led to believe where she hasn't been around a whole lot of people, and it shows. When she's at the party, it is some of the cringiest moments in the film, and it's also kind of the most formulaic that the film gets. However, you're really kind of seeing how this one event and what could have actually been multiple other events and that occurrences within the home have had on this girl.
I think I agree as far as the awkwardness of the party. I mean, who knew it could get any more awkward than Crispin Glover's dancing in part 4? But no, this party is pretty much the worst party ever. You're right. I feel as though, kind of like when you were talking about Laurie Strode, we're never going to see what happens to Tina later on after this. We saw what happened to Tommy Jarvis. I mean, it ruined him. That traumatic event from part 4 carried on to the next 2 films after that, and actually into the fan films and such now. So the Tina, we're never going to get to see how did this affect her, and where will she be? What will she become? Kind of like Laurie Strode. We saw what she becomes in 2018, and we feel, I think, genuinely sorry for her that she has now dedicated her entire life to this post-traumatic stress, and now how she's going to defend herself for when Michael does come back.
Yeah, and I feel like that's, and H2O like touched on that, but never to the degree that we got to see here in 2018. And I feel like kind of almost I would even kind of march in for Tina. The reason that she is so effective in this film to kind of be the final girl is partially because it almost could be to her that like Jason is quite literally the embodiment of her father. It is kind of the embodiment of all of this trauma that she has had 10 years built up to, and she's now having to face it in one go versus kind of through, not in the sense of kind of doing these sessions with Dr. Cruz.
It seems to me, like I said, and I think I touched on it earlier, every male figure that she's ever had in her life has sort of been abusive or some sort of letdown. And she can't even get emotionally close to the new final guy, if you will, that they gave in this movie. She's just, you can tell she's very guarded, and that's probably speaks to her as an actress. However, I do have another piece of information about that I didn't know until later on, but apparently they call Friday the 13th Part 7 Fry-gay the 13th. Apparently a large number of the male cast on that are openly gay men, and they were talking about how they couldn't get they just couldn't mesh. They just could not get any on-screen chemistry like we're used to seeing in other movies. And so I don't know if it's because she's such a tremendous actress that she's so guarded that she's just, done with men altogether, or really is it because of that chemistry? Apparently I found out that the two actors they did not like one another. They did not mesh well.
Wow, that is news to me, because I feel like they meshed well together on screen. But I'm also a terrible judge of character, so what do I know? But I will also tell listeners that if you guys would like a LGBT perspective on horror, that Friday the 13th podcast is a great podcast.
Oh, nice.
So it's interesting that this movie was kind of co-named that.
Yeah.
It's also worth mentioning that the actress that plays Tina, Laura Park Lincoln, was submitted 4 times by the director. And every time that he was submitting her through the casting process, they just messed up her hair or put her in a wig. And finally, on the 4th go around is when she actually received the job, because the director was like, "That's it. she's got it, or the casting director or whatever it was. But yeah, it took a little bit of time for her to actually come into her own.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that at all.
Also, the one of the last things that I want to kind of address on here before we touched on the mental health things here and there. One quick thing that I thought was interesting that the director talked about is this is the first time that any Friday the 13th film is given where the legend of Jason Voorhees is not actually passed down to the characters within the film. They have no idea of his existence.
That is a very good point. I didn't realize that. I was even going to bring up the fact that this is one of the first one in the franchise where they revisit every movie before then. It's I think the first time that you get every single one of them, like where they say this is the legend of Jason Voorhees, and it's passed down to the audience. But like you're right, there's no like, oh, by the way, this guy Jason. It's almost like they have no idea who this person is.
So that's why the scene in particular between Tina and Nick is so crucial, is because you're kind of viewing who Jason is with these characters because they have no idea about it. And it's also ironic that this campsite happens to be such a traumatic event for Tina, but also this kind of like shared grief or a commonality between all of the families affected by Jason's victims throughout the first 6 films that we've seen, and even predates them when you look back at the first film, where it's not just, oh, this is happening on one night. No, this is happening over decades because Miss Voorhees is wanting revenge. So you have legitimate like decades worth of trauma that is buried into the soil of this place.
Right, and another thing is, it's not really said, but it's another one of the movies, kind of like in part 4, where it's not exactly at Camp Crystal Lake. It's in the surrounding location of the camp. So there's probably a reason why, Jason, he's not just at Camp Crystal Lake, but he's in the surrounding area. So people could have moved in, moved out. We're talking about this is 10 years since her father. So we're saying that it's probably 10 years plus years since, Tommy Jarvis put him at the bottom of the lake, and it's just one of those things that has faded away.
Yeah, it is interesting to kind of consider that. And we talked about this last year during our Watchmen series, where you have a group of people or a group of individuals that kind of have gone through this very terrifying or just horrific event, and kind of like that shared grief or shared trauma is something that you can be experience. And so I'm almost kind of curious if we have kind of a Halloween 6 situation where you have a family that has, unbeknownst to one of the family members, actually know the history of that area, and you have other people, because who's to say that those news clippings didn't exist prior to Dr. Cruz?
Right, exactly.
So, but I think that this is going to be another one in the books for us, talking about Friday the 13th, Part 7, and the New Blood. And so, Dusty, one more time, where can people find you online, sir?
Sure, I'm at TikTok and Instagram at Dusty the 13th, and hopefully you'll give me a follow there and like my comical stance on Jason Voorhees.
You guys can follow me. I'm also on TikTok. I am at Gentleman Ghostface. You guys can also follow me on Letterboxd. I'm at Captain Nostalgia. Make sure that you guys tweet to us and let us know where Friday the 13th Part 7 lands in your pantheon of love for the franchise. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Is it just all right? Let us know. Tweet to us at Victims and Villains, but you guys can find all of our social media at victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can find links to our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch. Also, you guys can find us wherever you guys get your major podcasting platforms, as well as support us on Patreon and Ko-fi to help us get mental health resources into schools and conventions and film festivals alike. And most importantly, if you guys go to victimsandvillains.net, you guys will find more podcasts just like this one, including our past Friday the 13th episodes, movie reviews, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. So until next time, remember,